Welcome to the Swim Swam podcast. I'm your host, Coleman Hodges. Joining me today from Naples, Italy, we have the pleasure of sitting down and picking the brain of Energy Standard head coach, Tom Rushton. Tom, how's it going, man?
Hi. Great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, good. I'm in Naples. It's beautiful. No complaints.
First season as the head coach of the club, but you've been with them for all 3 seasons. What has that transition been like for you of really taking charge of the club while James steps into the managerial position?
To be honest, between James and I, it really hasn't been a huge change for us. We are basically doing the exact same thing for both of us that we were doing before. We've been working together now since 2017 with the club. Before ISL, we were, we've kind of been pushing things, pushing the envelope together, trying to keep everything glued together. So it really isn't any change. Obviously, there's the title is the change, and for James and myself both, but everything else is basically the same.
Yeah, I mean so you've gotten to work with these athletes for 4 years now, which is a pretty special thing. I mean, I think Energy Standard before ISL was a pretty special thing, getting to go to Gloria Sports Arena and work with some of the best athletes in the world in Turkey. Can you tell me just briefly about that experience and what you picked up those first couple of years being at Gloria in Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I love Gloria, and now having opportunities to get back there, I really enjoyed, and savor those. We did working with Estonia before Tokyo. We went back for 2 weeks, and it was really great to see all of those guys again. Gloria was really good for us while we were there with Energy Standard, and I think when we started there, which was for myself, it was early 2017, and James started late 2016. Turkey was not exactly a hot destination to go to, and nobody had heard of Gloria Sports Arena. So for us, it was a bit of a leap of faith to do that. And I think certainly from my part, my peers looked at me like I was a crazy person going out to Turkey and kind of doing this. But now, obviously, Gloria is quite well known, and I think a lot because of us putting it on the map. But I mean, they do a fantastic job, and they're very professional. And I know that the sports marketing guys they go to all of the major competitions and try to sell their product, and they do a great job. So I think now people are a lot more comfortable with that. But yeah, certainly when we went, everyone thought we were nuts, and then even to bring in some of the athletes, that was a bit the athletes were quite reticent. There was some hesitation for sure, both with the athletes and even with the federations, to allow their athletes to go to what they perceived as various different perceptions of things. But the reality is that Antalya is a beautiful place. Turkey's very wonderful. The people are awesome, and we had nothing but good things about it. So,
yeah, I mean, and then just the cherry on top to get to work with athletes like Chad Leclos, Sarah Sjostrom, Michaela Romanchuk. It's the list goes on. What do you feel like you got, especially those first few months of working with those athletes? Were you coaching specific athletes? Were you and James, just kind of working with everyone, or did you split off into groups? How did you guys kind of find your flow in coaching that group?
I mean, both James and I have our, we're competent coaches in whatever we do, but we both have our kind of preferred niche. For me, it's the middle distance around 200s and 400s, and James enjoys working with the sprinters, the 50s and the 100 guys. And so we kind of gravitate towards those areas. We do work with everybody, of course, But when we started in 2016, 2017, it wasn't the star-studded cast that people associate now with the club. We had quite a different cast of characters, and some of them made it all the way through. Others, came in and came out, and then slowly we built up. And I think that it was a little bit bittersweet for us because obviously with COVID and with everything that's happened, we were not and with the COVID restrictions and kind of creating basically making it impossible for us to finish last season. And then also because of COVID, the Olympics being postponed a year, we were not able to really finish the project the way that we wanted to in that regard. Obviously we've still got the ISL and that's the new thing, but when we got there, it was all about getting the athletes to Tokyo. And so it was a little bit bittersweet to watch so many of the athletes that we've been working with for so long do so well in Tokyo, but for us to be, passing them off back to their home countries a few months before. Obviously great to see them succeed, but a little bit frustrating at the same time.
Makes sense. So if you're working with the middle distance guys, who did you get to coach your first couple of years at Gloria? And what was that like for you? Can you share any stories or particular memories that stick out, that middle distance crew?
The middle distance crew, we again kind of evolved. We had some coming in, some coming out. Chad obviously is kind of, Chad and Sarah being the captains of our ISL team are obviously kind of the people that the swimmers that most people think of, I think, when they think of the squad. And although Sarah is actually, she's obviously known for her sprinting, in terms of training, she's quite formidable, and she would gravitate more towards the longer distance side of sprint. So she frequently would be in the middle distance squad, Chad obviously as well, somebody that's in there. And then, but the squad's never just made up of those type of people. So, we've got, and like I said, I was in Estonia, I was in Tokyo with Estonia. One of the athletes that I've had the pleasure of working with now for, I think, over 4 years, maybe, is Gregor Zirk from Estonia, who's, he came in out of Plymouth Leander program. He finished there and came into our squad and really progressed all the way through and ended up making semifinal in Tokyo. And kudos to him for the work that he put in to get to that point. When I came from Canada, I came with Mary Sophie Harvey, who's still part of her ISL team. And, she's just a terrific trainer and super versatile athlete. She's obviously had success in 200s and 400s. She also come down to some athletes that, that's the kind of the core. And then on the Turkish side, we have our number one draft pick, Victoria Gunyas, who has been a real staple for our ISL squad. And, we obviously being based in Turkey, we had seen her quite a lot and we were familiar with her. And as it came towards, I guess it was 2018, we knew that the ISL was going to become a thing, and we kind of positioned ourselves in order to try to help her out, because she was in a bit of a bad situation with terms of coaching. And so we picked her up and she became, again, just a staple in that middle distance team.
Yeah, it's just fun hearing you talk about these athletes that you've formed this now years-long relationship with. And so coming into this season, obviously we had the Budapest bubble last year because of COVID, and I think that was a success, all in all, given the circumstances. And then this year it's kind of a similar format, but you've got 3 different mini bubbles, Naples being the first. So coming into Naples, even before match 1, What is training like, and what are you doing that first week to get them race ready? Knowing I'm assuming you can't hit them too hard with training.
Well, I mean, so for context, I mean, uh, I was we came out of Tokyo, and then we had three weeks, and um, I was sending sessions to Chad, Victoria, and to Gregor, and my message to them was basically we basically took 1 week rest where they went home to their respective countries, and Chad and Gregor hadn't been back to their countries for quite a number of months and weeks, so it was good for them to get back and see family and friends. And then the second week of that break was a little bit more, I wouldn't say focused on training, but it was about being active and touching the water a little bit. And then the third week I started sending sessions, but it was very much a kind of piece together, do what you can do, be show up ready to compete, not necessarily ready to swim best times or anything. And then when we arrived, I think we arrived on the Monday and had our first match on the Thursday. So we didn't have really much time to train. It was more about get wet a few times, get familiar with the pool, and then race and see what we got.
And I mean, again, especially for these middle distance athletes, at least here, I think we're so used to this idea of like you have your big summer meet and then you take some time off and then you train for 2 months, right? You like get back in shape, and then you almost don't race until maybe October, maybe even November. And so to see, especially these athletes compete in 200s and 400s, and for some of them have really good times, do you expect that just because of the caliber of athlete they are? Again, as a coach, how do you navigate that, knowing that they don't have this huge base of training already, but they need to be race ready multiple weeks in a row?
I think on the one side, we're very lucky, fortunate that it's a short course competition, because obviously that's a lot easier, especially as a middle distance athlete. It's a lot easier to be ready to race, and ready to race is, it's a pretty broad term. Being ready just means like literally being ready to stand up and race the person next to you, not necessarily compete at your best. But yeah, for the middle distance guys, especially the 400s are much more forgiving in the short pool than in long course, and they can get away with it a little bit. And then, so we had the first match, and then we had, I think, 4 days where we got just touching the water and actually like, I would say, refamiliarizing ourselves with training. And then we had a second match, and now we've actually got a 2-week period where we can get some training in. And what we try to do now is to again touch all of the different training zones and try to get a little bit of quality work in, but without really accumulating a huge amount of fatigue, because we still obviously we have to race, and we have to race quite fast. But the hope is that we can get a little bit of work, still get a little bit of volume, but because of the because we're not really deep into work, we should be able to rest another couple of days and hopefully swim well again in the third match. We'll see. Yeah. But this year is going to be, I think, this year is going to be different because there's so many competitions that have been postponed from the COVID issues, obviously. But also, with all ISL. So we have ISL. Some of the athletes would go to World Cups, and we've got Eindhoven ISL, and then we've got some of the athletes have European short course, World short course, ISL final, and then World Championships in May, and then Commonwealth Games or European Championships as well. So it's a lot of competing this season, and I think it's just part of hopefully returning to a normal schedule after the whole COVID stuff. And, hopefully we can navigate our way through training in specific targeted blocks and then racing as well as we can on those other pieces. So.
Yeah. So speaking of, so much racing in the next calendar year, I think the ISL has certainly brought this up. I think a lot of the athletes associated with Energy Standard, especially Sarah and Chad, have kind of adopted this philosophy of getting in shape through racing and racing quite a bit, not necessarily just training and then showing up to the big meet, not having had a ton of meet reps. How do you, as a coach, what do you think of that philosophy? Personally, I love it as a swim fan solely because you get to see the athletes race more and you get more data and you get to kind of see how they operate a little bit more in the public eye. But just as a coach, how do you feel like, what do you feel like that does for the athlete of, getting yourself in shape or using the meets as a part of your training?
I mean, I think that ISL is a different type of meet because, when you go to a week-long competition like Tokyo, you're not actually racing a lot, unless you're one of those athletes who has a massive schedule. And even, I think some of the superstars from the US have a bigger schedule still because they would have also relays.
Mhm.
Most athletes are not racing that many times. And so then what happens is you come into the competition, you've got an 8-day competition and you're racing maybe 5 or 6 times in that 8 days. It's a big resting commitment, and it's a big change from the normal training. ISL is quite different because in the 2 days you're probably racing 6 times, something like that, or 5 or 6 times, and it's only a 2-hour racing block. So you're not really taking the athlete out of their training environment too much. Depending on what we've found this year is depending on the time slot, because local time in Naples, we're competing 8 to 10 p.m. most of the time. And so that obviously is quite different than the normal training time. And so there's changes that we have to make for that, but we're almost able to get a normal training template in most of the weeks with just a few lighter sessions to accommodate for the more intense sessions, which are the swimming. But if you're doing 2,000 meter warm up, you're racing, and then you're doing a 500 swim down, you're racing, you're doing a 500 swim down, you're racing, you're doing a 500 swim down, you're still getting in, 5K session. So it's very different. And I think because of that, the athletes are able to sustain a little bit better. Obviously, when they attend the major international competitions, it's different. And I think personally, that's the major difference between those big end of season competitions that you would taper and sharpen for exclusively. And not to say that we don't try to have our athletes perform their best at the end of season at ISL. It's just that it's a different type of sharpening, a different type of resting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we've seen both. The really interesting thing to me is we've seen both methods work, right? In different situations. People go best times in ISL in the regular season. Coleman Stewart just won a world record at the first meet, and then we've seen athletes taper down for an ISL final or obviously Olympics or World Championships, and they go really fast there too. And so I just find that very interesting because I think the more opportunities there are for racing, the better it is for everyone. Again, that's also just as a fan, but it seems like we've seen more and more athletes using those meets and being able to incorporate meets as a part of their training, as opposed to just, maybe competing once every 4 to 6 weeks. So I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I think there are definitely different cultures around it and different training philosophies. Obviously, we have athletes from many different countries, and those athletes are coming from many different coaches. And it's I would say that certainly when we're working with the athletes and trying to work with their home coaches, there's a lot of different philosophies and a lot of different schools of thought around how and what they should be doing at any given moment. And part of our job here on the ground in Naples is to make sure that everyone gets what they need in terms of base training, in terms of quality work, in terms of, especially in terms of attention, because some of the athletes will come in with a program or even just a workout from home that's very specific to what they need. A good example, and I think that Matt will be okay with me saying this, is Madeline Bannock has a lot of work she does specifically to work on her underwater stuff.
Mhm.
She's obviously excellent at that, and we want to support her in doing what she needs to do there. But it does mean that sometimes she's a little bit outside of the group, and so it's really important that for us that if we have a group doing one thing and we have one or two athletes doing something else, that we make sure that they're still getting the attention that they need, because you don't want to feel like just because you have something special that you need to do, you're going to be being ignored. So I think that's a huge part of what we need to be aware of as coaching staff, is to make sure that all of the athletes feel like what they're doing is valuable and that they're a valuable member of the team, because obviously they are, especially in ISL.
Yeah, that seems like a point that you wouldn't get from the outside, but once you say it, it's like, oh yeah, obviously in ISL the team comes first, right? And building that team and putting all those pieces together is an integral part. I hope Matt isn't upset. We love Matt Kretich. He's a great guy. We love all his swimmers.
I do too. So yeah.
Is there? I am curious. Is there any athlete on your team on Energy Standard right now who once a week or something just cranks massive yardage and feels like that's what they need?
Oh yeah, you'd be surprised. Again, one of our athletes, a sprinter, this week, this is so it's September 10th right now when we're recording this, and we're towards the end of our first week of a 2-week training block in between matches 2 and 3, which I think it's match 3 was our second match. But one of the athletes, to rebuild his capacity, is every morning this week he's just swimming 2 hours straight. And he's a sprinter. He's 100, sometimes some 200s, but it's everyone comes in with a different, like I said, different philosophy. And I think that certainly for myself, in the last 5 years, I've seen so many different ways of training athletes. It certainly makes you recognize that you don't necessarily know the right answers, because you see success from so many completely radically different ways of training, that we clearly have a lot to learn still in terms of what creates great swimmers.
So then on that note, taking a little bit of a dive into your life outside of swimming, you're also into trail running and ultra races. And I'm curious if that ever bleeds over into your swim coaching or the way you approach swimming, or how you think about training philosophy at all.
I think that in some ways I kind of I can connect sometimes with the athletes a little bit more in terms of how they might feel in some training environments. But running is a very different activity than swimming. You're running, especially for me, if I'm running for an hour, it's really not very long. And I would say there's not a huge amount of intensity that goes into it, whereas swimming, it's mainly interval based. And definitely, other than the one athlete that I just mentioned, most people don't swim for an hour or 2 hours straight. So in some ways, but yeah, I think that definitely I can connect with the athletes sometimes on as from an athletic point of view, but it is very different. So they enjoy kind of spectating sometimes when a lot of the time I'll commute from the pool to the hotel or back and forth, and they find that kind of interesting, I would say. But
What so my mom's a trail runner. She runs ultra races as well, and so that's why I wanted to ask you about it, because I'm just curious what struck you about running. How did you pick that up? Because I know you were a swimmer in college. You were, you know, D3 NCAA All-American, and but how did you get to trail running from there?
It's a good question. After I stopped swimming, um, I took it. My first kind of coaching job was with a small club in Canada in a town called Summerland, which is right next to Penticton, which is where Ironman Canada was held at the time, and I think is now held there again. And I didn't really know anybody, so I got involved a little bit with some master swimmers, and some of them were triathletes, and they said, "Oh, you should come and do triathlon." So I did triathlon for a while after I stopped swimming, which I liked a lot. And I was definitely a better triathlete than I was a swimmer. But this was, the same time that I was becoming a swim coach. And as I got better at swim coaching, I would travel, and my athletes would go to competitions farther and farther away, and it would become much more of a commitment. And cycling and traveling is just not easy. It's a very difficult sport to do when you're traveling all the time. And I also don't like to do things half-heartedly. So after a couple of years, I just decided that I wasn't going to do the triathlon anymore. When I started, my friends had told me, "Oh, running, you like running because you can do it anywhere. All you need is, a pair of shoes." And I did not really, took me a long time to get into running, but it turned out they were actually correct, because now it's easy to do it anywhere. And I also find that it helps me be a little bit more disciplined with myself, trying to find, little moments to get a run in. So definitely, yeah, that's kind of and trail running. It's for me, it's more fun. I get bored on the road. Like it's not for me. A lot of people don't really like uphill running and stuff like that, but I find it, I like it. It's hard, so it's good. What distances does your mom do?
Um, she she recently did a 100K in Washington State. And so I think she's done a few 50Ks. I think she's maybe done a 50-mile. She's looking at a couple more of those in the future. She was talking about doing a 100-mile race, but I don't think she's going to do that this go around.
Yeah.
But yeah, she got into it and really enjoys it. And she primarily does trail running as well. And I did that with her for a while. And I'm with you there. Trail running is where it's at. It's just much more scenic, much more serene.
Yeah. I took the 3 weeks that I mentioned after Tokyo. I actually went out to Colorado and kind of did a little bit of a personal altitude camp, because then at the end of the 3 weeks, I did the Pikes Peak race. And actually met up with Russell Mark out there. His brother was doing the race, and we hung out a little bit. But I guess that's one way that what I did. One of the thoughts in my head was that I would do this altitude piece for myself, because obviously it was going to be helpful when you're racing up to 4,400 meters or 14,000 feet or whatever. But also, I'm now, after this Naples stop, I'm planning an altitude camp with the athletes. So I felt like it was going to be quite helpful and beneficial to be able to sympathize, I guess is the right word, but also to preempt some of their concerns and symptoms, I guess, of training at altitude. And it's actually quite interesting talking to the athletes who are going to be joining me. Some of them have done altitude training before, and I think it actually does quite reassure them that definitely wasn't perfect in my personal 3-week camp. I made some errors in training a little bit too hard too early and things like that. But trying to reassure, like, talk to them about how easy you need to go, because I think a lot of athletes seem to have had a negative experience with things like that, where they've gone too hard too early. And as a coach, I know when I'm writing sessions, it's really difficult to, especially with the easy sessions, it's really difficult to write an easy session that's easy enough for the athletes to actually regenerate appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can understand if you, as a coach, have never actually trained at altitude, how it would be quite difficult to understand. Really, it's very boring work. Like, you just basically show up for at least the first 10 days and you kind of, plod back and forth, and it's not going to be not very much exciting as a coach. So,
yeah, that's, so where are you guys doing the altitude camp?
we're planning to go to Sierra Nevada in Spain.
Sounds nice. That's pretty cool. And that's obviously seems like a cool opportunity. You have this downtime between the regular season and the playoffs, and to get to do that. I mean, I know that's very popular here, and I know I've heard a lot of athletes say about training at altitude, it's definitely a different animal, and you do have to treat it as such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The way that I've tried to explain it to the athletes is there's lots of different ways that you can increase your training load. And, the easiest one is to add volume. Everyone thinks, well, if I train more, I've added training load, which is correct. And it's just another way to do that. But if you try to do, but also a lot of people will go to a training camp and then try to add training load, which is normal. But if you go to an altitude camp and then you also add volume, this is where I think people can potentially get into trouble pretty quickly. So we'll see. Hopefully it's successful, and hopefully we all come out of it fitter and faster. We'll see in a few weeks, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll be excited to see how that goes, certainly, and just in the nearest future, how the next match goes. But yeah, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat and give us some insight into the energy standard methods. It's been really great. Yeah. Getting your insight today.
Yeah, no, it's been excellent to sit down with you and chat, and look forward to our next match, like you said. And, we were really, really pleased with the way the athletes came and showed up, especially at the second match. We asked them to be a little bit better on the second match, and they were really actually quite a lot better. So I think it'll be interesting now to see how we go from a little bit of a break and then step into this third match. So it's going to be, I think personally, it's probably our toughest match. I think we're against London, LA, and Tokyo, I believe. And I know London's going to get their Australian reinforcements coming in. So we'll see.
You've been listening to the Swim Swam podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. You can take Swim Swam podcast on the go by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Look for links in the description below, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos as well.